The bicycle was found leaning against a guardrail on the side of a mountain highway. No rider, no injury, no sign of a struggle. Just a navy blue bike, alone on the shoulder of a Colorado road on a Sunday afternoon in May. Her sunglasses were still in the car. Her hydration pack was still in the car. Her helmet was found a mile away, undamaged, lying 10 meters off the road. Investigators looked at all of it and began asking the same question. Did she ever actually go for a ride? May 10th, 2020. Mother's Day, Maysville, Colorado, a small unincorporated community in Chaffee County, population a few hundred, sitting deep in the Rocky Mountains about 2.5 hours southwest of Denver. It is the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name, where the roads wind through dense pine forest and open mountain valley, where weeks can pass without the arrival of a stranger. Suzanne Morphew was 49 years old. She had lived in the area with her husband Barry and their 2 daughters for several years. By almost every account, she was active and fit, devoted to her family, deeply religious, and genuinely loved by the people in her life. Friends described her warmth without reservation. She was, by all appearances, the kind of person who holds a community together simply by being in it. That Sunday morning, Barry Morphew left the family home for a work project in the Denver area, roughly 3 hours away. The couple's daughters were not home. Suzanne was alone. According to investigators, what happened in the hours that followed, and in the hours before Barry left the previous day, is the center of everything that comes after. The timeline they eventually constructed, piece by piece, using phone records and security cameras and the statements of people who had been inside that marriage, tells a story that is deeply different from the one Barry Morphew would offer publicly in the days and weeks after his wife disappeared. At some point on the morning of May 10th, a bicycle left the Morphew property. Suzanne's bicycle, a navy blue mountain bike, was located later that day near the intersection of Highway 50 and County Road 225, less than a mile from the family home. The helmet was found further down the road, approximately a mile away, lying 10 meters off the highway on the shoulder. It was undamaged. There was no blood at either location, no clothing, no indication that a fall had occurred or that any kind of accident had taken place. Back at the house, in the garage, Suzanne's Range Rover was still parked. Inside it, still in the car, were her sunglasses and her Camelback hydration pack. People who knew Suzanne told investigators she never rode without those items. She always took her sunglasses, she always took her water. The fact that both remained in the vehicle while the bike appeared on the roadside began to shape investigators' thinking in a direction that would prove difficult to reverse. They started to believe the bicycle had been placed there, that the scene on that mountain highway had been staged to look like a ride that never actually happened. Body cam footage from the responding deputy shows the moment officers first located the bike. The deputy approaches it slowly, calling out Suzanne's name as he gets closer. The camera sweeps the surrounding area. There is nothing, just the bike, the road, and the trees. The deputy calls out again. The footage becomes one of the most watched pieces of video evidence in the entire case, not because of what it shows, but because of what it doesn't. There is no trace of Suzanne anywhere near that bicycle. No disturbance in the brush, no footprints leading away from the road, no indication that any person was recently present at that location. The bike sits there like a prop, like something placed rather than dropped, like an answer to a question that nobody had yet thought to ask. 4 days after Suzanne disappeared, Barry Morphew posted a video to a Facebook page that had been created to help search for her. He stood in front of the camera at home, his voice breaking at intervals, his eyes appearing wet. He addressed the video directly to Suzanne and to whoever might have taken her. He said they would do whatever it takes. He said no questions asked. He said the girls need you. He said, honey, I love you. The video was viewed hundreds of thousands of times almost immediately. It was shared across platforms. People commented that they were heartbroken for the family. Some people reached out to say they were praying for Suzanne's return. The overwhelming reaction from the public was sympathy. Investigators, who were watching the video alongside everyone else, were paying attention to something that the public was not focused on. They were watching his face. They were watching the way his body moved. They were watching the small details that grief produces in people who are actually experiencing it and comparing those details to what they were seeing on that screen. A body language expert who later analyzed the footage described her concerns in detail. She said his distress appeared constructed. She pointed to specific facial tics and said they were not consistent with genuine emotional overwhelm. She said the fear she saw in him during his first court appearance, when he arrived in handcuffs and shackles, standing straight-shouldered but with eyes that she described as containing stark terror, was more authentic than anything she had seen in the Facebook video. That distinction between performed grief and real fear became one of the threads investigators would pull on throughout the years that followed. While Barry was posting that video and giving interviews and publicly positioning himself as a husband devastated by the disappearance of his wife, law enforcement was constructing a different version of May 10th, using surveillance footage and cell phone records. Barry had told investigators he had been at a job site in Broomfield, a Denver suburb where his construction crew was working, when he received the call around 5 p.m. that Suzanne had been reported missing. Cameras told a different story. Footage from a hotel in Broomfield and from surrounding businesses showed Barry in the area for approximately 9 hours and 45 minutes that day. Of that time, less than 30 minutes could be accounted for at the actual job site he claimed to have been working at. The rest of the day, more than 9 hours, existed in a record of movement that investigators could partially reconstruct from camera footage, but could not fully explain. What was he doing? Where was he going? The cameras caught him at locations he had not mentioned. They caught him stopping at multiple separate trash cans throughout the Broomfield area, pulling over, getting out, depositing something, moving on to the next location. Investigators could not determine what was being thrown away. By the time search warrants were obtained and those trash cans were examined, whatever had been placed in them was gone. One of Barry's own employees told investigators something that added another layer of complication to the timeline. He and Barry had planned to travel to the job site together that morning. That had been the arrangement. Barry left without him. He didn't call. He didn't explain. He simply wasn't there when his employee arrived to make the drive together. That detail, small on its own, fit into a larger pattern that investigators were assembling. A man who knew exactly where he was going that day and did not need company for any part of it. When investigators spoke with Barry Morphew in the immediate days after Suzanne disappeared, they noticed the scratches. On his hands and on his left arm, there were visible marks, the kind of marks that look like fingernail scratches, running across the skin in parallel lines. Barry told investigators he had been out searching the property for his wife, pushing through tree branches and brush in the forest around their home. He said the scratches came from the branches. Prosecutors would later argue in court filings that the pattern of the injuries was more consistent with what happens during a physical struggle, the kind of marks left when someone grabs at an attacker or tries to push them away. Barry's explanation never changed across multiple interviews. He said it was the trees. He said he had been searching. He said he had been desperate to find her. Inside the Morphew home, investigators found things that would become central to every subsequent legal proceeding in the case. In a locked gun safe, they recovered a tranquilizer rifle. With the rifle were tranquilizer darts and the associated equipment for loading and firing them. Barry Morphew operated a deer farm, and the use of animal tranquilizers in that setting was not inherently suspicious. But in the family's clothes dryer, inside a load of laundry that had been washed and dried, investigators found a plastic needle cap. It was the kind of cap that seals the hypodermic needle on a tranquilizer dart before the dart is loaded into the rifle and fired. The cap fits over the needle to protect it during storage and is removed immediately before use. For that cap to end up inside a running dryer, it would have had to travel from the gun safe area into someone's clothing pocket and then into a washing machine with that clothing. Barry told investigators he had no idea how the cap had gotten into the dryer. He said he could not explain it. Prosecutors argued that the explanation was straightforward. The cap had been in the pocket of whatever Barry was wearing on the day Suzanne disappeared, and it had been washed with his clothes afterward, either accidentally or as part of an effort to clean evidence from his clothing. Investigators also recovered a spy pen from inside the Morphew home. It was a voice-activated recording device, small enough to be mistaken for an ordinary pen, capable of capturing audio continuously without anyone in the room knowing it was running. Suzanne had purchased it herself. According to investigators, she had done so because she suspected Barry was having an affair and she wanted to catch evidence of it. She had placed the pen in locations around the house where she hoped to record Barry's conversations. What the pen actually captured in the months of recordings recovered from it was something she had not anticipated. Investigators found no evidence that Barry was having an affair. What they found instead was evidence of a 2-year secret relationship that Suzanne herself had been conducting with a man named Jeff Libler, who lived in Michigan, had a wife and 6 children, and had met with Suzanne 6 times, twice in Indiana. On May 9th, the day before Mother's Day and the day before Suzanne disappeared, Suzanne and Liebler had exchanged 59 messages. The recordings from the spy pen also captured fragments of what sounded like a difficult conversation between Barry and Suzanne in the days before she vanished, a conversation that investigators believed had the character of an argument, though portions of the audio were difficult to make out clearly. Barry denied that there had been any serious conflict in the marriage. He maintained that everything between them had been fine. He told investigators they had a wonderful life and a wonderful marriage and that she was a good mother. He said this in multiple interviews. He said it consistently. And investigators, who were listening to the recordings from a device his wife had secretly installed in their home because she was afraid of something, noted the distance between what he was saying and what those recordings suggested about the atmosphere inside that house in the weeks before she disappeared. Cell phone records from May 9th, the day before Suzanne vanished, showed Barry's phone pinging repeatedly in different locations around and inside the family property. The pattern was unusual. The phone appeared to be moving at a pace inconsistent with normal activity, rapid, irregular movements across the property's perimeter and through the interior of the house. When investigators showed Barry the data and asked him to account for it, he said he had been running around the property shooting chipmunks. He said chipmunks were a persistent nuisance on the land and he had been trying to eliminate them. That explanation remained his account of that data throughout every subsequent interview and legal proceeding. Prosecutors looked at the same phone records and offered a different interpretation. They believed the movement pattern shown in the data was consistent with a pursuit, someone moving quickly and unpredictably through a confined space, changing direction without warning, covering the same ground more than once. They believed it showed Barry chasing Suzanne through the house and the surrounding property after she had been shot with the tranquilizer and was trying to get away. There was also a damaged doorframe inside the home that no one could satisfactorily explain. The previous owners of the property, when contacted by investigators, confirmed that the damage had not been there when they sold the house to the Morphews. It was new damage, and it was on the kind of door that someone might break through under significant physical pressure. Barry Morphew was arrested on May 5, 2021, 1 year, nearly to the day, after Suzanne went missing. He was charged with first-degree murder after deliberation, tampering with physical evidence, attempting to influence a public servant, and tampering with a deceased human body. The charges had been built over 12 months of investigation that had involved the Chaffee County Sheriff's Office, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and agents from the FBI's Denver Division. Barry arrived at his first court appearance in handcuffs and leg shackles. He was led into the Chaffee County Courthouse before a crowd of reporters and cameras and members of a community that had spent a year searching for Suzanne and waiting for something to happen. His daughters, Macy and Mallory, were present. They held hands and sobbed. Barry stood straight. His head was level, his shoulders were back, and his eyes, according to the body language expert who was watching the same footage that everyone else was watching, contained an expression she described as raw, uncontrolled fear. She distinguished carefully between his posture and his eyes. The posture, she said, was deliberate. The eyes were not. The criminal case against Barry Morphew collapsed in April 2022. A judge dismissed all charges without prejudice, meaning they could theoretically be refiled at a later date, after the defense brought a motion alleging prosecutorial misconduct. The specific allegations centered on the lead investigator in the case, who had given interviews to media organizations and appeared in segments on YouTube true crime programs while the case was still active and pretrial proceedings were ongoing. The defense argued that this conduct had prejudiced their client's right to a fair trial. The judge agreed that there had been misconduct sufficient to justify dismissal. Barry Morphew walked out of a Fremont County courthouse. The trial had been moved from Chaffee County after a finding that he could not receive an impartial jury there, flanked by his 2 daughters. He later filed a $15 million civil lawsuit against the law enforcement authorities who had investigated and charged him. The investigation formally continued. Informally, the case had the feeling of something that might be over. His daughters believed their father. His defense maintained he was innocent. The body had never been found. On September 22, 2023, agents from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation were working in a remote stretch of high desert near the small town of Moffett in Saguache County, roughly an hour south of the Morphew home. They were not there for Suzanne. They were searching for the remains of another missing woman, Edna Quintana, who had disappeared the previous spring. What they found instead, in a shallow grave in a sagebrush-covered expanse of prairie, were human bones. Forensic teams spent multiple days at the site, carefully excavating and recovering remains that had been scattered across a wide area. The bones were identified as Suzanne Morphew's. The condition of the remains told investigators something beyond the simple fact of her death. Many of the bones had been significantly bleached, a process that takes time and involves exposure to the elements in a way that suggested the grave near Moffett had not been where Suzanne was originally placed after she died. The evidence, according to investigators, was consistent with the remains having been moved, possibly more than once, in the years between her disappearance and their discovery. Someone had gone back. Someone had moved her. The indictment filed in 2025 would allege explicitly that Suzanne's body had been relocated at least twice after her death. Toxicology testing performed on Suzanne Morphew's recovered remains identified the presence of a potent animal tranquilizer, a compound used in veterinary and wildlife settings, rarely encountered outside those specific professional contexts. The Chaffee County coroner ruled Suzanne's death a homicide. Prosecutors, in their subsequent filings, argued that only one private citizen in the entire geographic area of Colorado where Suzanne had lived had documented legitimate access to the specific tranquilizer compound detected in her remains at the time she disappeared. That person was Barry Morphew through his operation of the deer farm. The tranquilizer rifle and the darts remained in evidence. The needle cap recovered from the dryer remained in evidence. And now, for the first time, there was a body, and a toxicology report that connected the substance investigators had suspected from the beginning to the physical evidence recovered from Suzanne's remains 3 years after she vanished. On June 18, 2025, 5 years after Suzanne Morphew disappeared from a mountain highway on Mother's Day morning, a grand jury in the 12th Judicial District of Colorado returned a new indictment charging Barry Morphew with first-degree murder. He was taken into custody 2 days later in Arizona. In January 2026, he appeared in an Alamosa County courtroom and entered a not guilty plea through his defense attorney. He waived his right to a speedy trial. A jury trial is currently scheduled to begin in October 2026, with proceedings expected to run through late November. His daughters remain publicly supportive of him. His defense team is expected to argue that the investigation was flawed from the beginning, that the evidence is circumstantial, and that the focus on Barry came at the exclusion of other possible explanations for what happened to Suzanne. There are things in this case that may not be resolved even after the trial concludes. What was in the trash cans Barry visited throughout Broomfield on the day his wife disappeared? Those items were gone before investigators could examine them. Nobody knows what they were. Who moved Suzanne's remains after her death, and how many times, and to how many different locations? The grave near Moffat was established not to be the original burial site. What the original location was, and what traces might remain there, has not been made fully public. What exactly did the spy pen record in the final days before Mother's Day, in those fragments of conversation between Barry and Suzanne that investigators described as having the character of an argument? The recordings were disclosed in portions. The complete picture of what was said inside that house in the days before Suzanne disappeared has never been released to the public in full. According to investigators, the case they have built answers these questions. According to the defense, the case the prosecution has built is constructed from inference and circumstance, from evidence that points in one direction but does not prove what it appears to prove. In the fall of 2026, a jury in Colorado will hear both of those arguments and decide which one is more consistent with the facts. They will hear about a bicycle found on the side of a road with no rider nearby. They will hear about a husband who spent most of Mother's Day at locations he did not initially disclose, disposing of items that were never identified, in a city 3 hours from home. They will hear about scratches on his arms and a needle cap in his dryer and a spy pen that his wife installed because she was afraid of something she could not name. They will hear about bones found in the desert, 3 years after a woman vanished, moved from wherever they had originally been placed. And they will hear the toxicology report that found in those bones a substance that, according to prosecutors, only one person in that part of Colorado had access to. Suzanne Morphew left her house on Mother's Day. Her sunglasses and her hydration pack stayed behind. Her helmet was found a mile away, undamaged, lying off the road. The bicycle was leaning against a guardrail. According to investigators, nobody saw her ride it. According to the indictment, she never did.